Thank you, Dean Slaughter. And I would like to commend you, Matt, for your recent message to the Tuck community on racism in America. I'm grateful that Tuck guides us towards empathy and wisdom, and hope that we each will contribute to bringing our country to a more just and egalitarian place in the coming weeks, months, and years. Dear parents and friends, dear Tuck deans, faculty, and staff, dear Tuck class of 2020, it is a great honor to be here today at the Tuck 2020 Investiture, even as we all wish we could be in Hanover rather than on our home screens. When the dean asked me a few months ago to speak at this investiture, it was in the context of the celebration of 50 years of women at Tuck. I graduated in one of the early classes, not 50 years ago, but nearly. However, in light of the circumstances of the last 3 months, I propose to speak on 2 topics. First, the challenge of the global pandemic we are all experiencing, and then a few words on the persisting challenges for women in the corporate world, and a bit about myself and my career. First, COVID-19. The class of 2020, around the United States and across the world, will be remembered as the class that had no graduation. So I applaud the Tuck class of 20 for its initiative in setting up this digital investiture. Bravo. We have all adapted to new ways of working, remote working, video interviews, Zoom cocktails, online groceries and meals, streaming of pop concerts and classical music, and virtual tours of museums. But you have missed the last months of the last term at Tuck, which alums remember fondly. We mostly had jobs, we knew where we were settling, and once mud season was over, we had the pleasure of hiking, ball games, job kegs, and the other joys of the Upper Valley without pressure of the previous 5 terms. But those terms and that pressure was the foundation for friendships you have made, which will endure for at least 50 years. We are in the midst, maybe the end of the beginning, if not the beginning of the end, of the global pandemic. Very unsettling, unprecedented. But based on my years since graduation from Tuck, my message to the class of 2020 is that this too shall pass. My Tuck class grew up in the benign 50s and 60s, but was jolted when here at Tuck by the 1973-75 recession. OPEC quadrupled oil prices, and the stock market had its worst crash since the Great Depression. Unprecedented. No investment banks were hiring, so those of us in finance took jobs in commercial banks or corporate functions. At the time, it seemed a great crisis. I joined Bankers Trust Company, now part of Deutsche Bank. It was one of the few banks at the time that didn't put women in the metropolitan division, but allowed us to travel. In my case, to cover clients in Texas, a great culture shock for this New Yorker. Looking back, it was really not so bad. We survived and prospered. The 80s were pretty good to us, a peacetime expansion. The beginning of the 90s brought another oil shock and consumer pessimism. But the balance of the decade saw the longest period of peacetime growth in U.S. history. This was your childhood, not so different from mine. Then in the late 90s, we had a major financial crisis in Asia, followed by a major financial crisis in Russia. At the time, August 1998, I was head of risk at EBRD. Russia unilaterally declared a moratorium on all debt payments, domestic and international, including the World Bank and EBRD. Unprecedented. We had 25% of our portfolio in Russia. EBRD was in only its 7th year of existence. The treaty under which we existed, which Russia had signed, said that we were exempt from any debt moratorium of any kind. It looked like it could be the end of the EBRD. But it wasn't. Russia came around a few days after furious negotiations in Moscow and issued a presidential order declaring EBRD debt exempt from the moratorium. Eventually, Russia recuperated, and EBRD continued its work. And I continued my career and was later appointed first vice president, second in command at the bank. And then September 11th, 2001, and the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. Unprecedented. I was 10 days into my term as first vice president at EBRD. We had offices and staff all over the former Soviet Union, including Central Asia. We swung into crisis mode. We wondered, would the US ever be safe again? But the USA survived. Rules changed. Travel restrictions were put into effect. We adapted to the new challenge of a new world order. Then we come to 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis, the housing bubble bursts, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and AIG collapse, not to mention Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, 2 US agencies. You were probably in high school or college. I was on the board of 4 listed companies, including Credit Suisse. The Swiss Central Bank provided a 60 billion Swiss franc rescue package for UBS, and fully expected Credit Suisse would need a similar bailout. I can tell you, those days really focused the mind on the responsibility and liability I had undertaken as a director of a systemically important global financial institution. Securities on our balance sheet took a very deep dive in a very short time. Capital ratios looked like being breached. Capital was scarce. The regulator was extremely interested. It looked bad. It looked like the end of the financial world as I had known it for more than 30 years. Unprecedented. Would Credit Suisse survive? And how? We did, and we raised private capital. It wasn't the end of the world. The global financial system endured. Rules changed. New restrictions came into force for institutions and individuals. But unfortunately, the reputation of bankers was pretty well destroyed. As an aside, one of the reasons I accepted to chair the British Bankers Association was to do my part to restore the reputation of our industry. Dull and respectable when I joined in the 70s, and not at all dull now, but also not yet respected. So I know that COVID-19 pandemic is exceptional. It is unprecedented. Global, so far resulting in over 350,000 deaths worldwide and 100,000 deaths in the United States, and multiples of that in unemployment. The global economy has been dealt a blow of unimaginable proportion. It will take time to recover. It won't be the same in the future. There will be new rules. There will be new restrictions. But you will survive, and your countries will survive. The ingenuity of humanity will be tested again. The Tuck class of 2020 and your fellow graduates around the world will take on this challenge and contribute to the development of the new normal. Revised rules, revised regulations, new restrictions, which will evolve to ensure the safety of all of us and rescue our economies. But before I leave the stage, a few words about 50 years of women at Tuck. In 1974, I was one of the first 10 female graduates with an MBA from Tuck. We left Hanover full of enthusiasm for the opportunities it gave us. The number of women at Tuck and other business schools grew rapidly, and by the early 80s in New York City, almost half the professional intake in the banks was female. But today, they're not half the managing directors. They're probably not half the directors. They may be half the vice presidents. And a female CEO is still a novelty. When Alison Rose was recently named CEO of NatWest in the UK, it was first-page news in every British paper. And we can be proud that Tuck has produced Elise Allen, T'74, recently retired CEO of GE Canada and currently chair of Tuck's Board of Overseers, and Sarah Ketterer, T'87, CEO of Causeway Capital, and Nikia Wright, T'09, CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times. But after 50 years of women at Tuck, there should be many more women and Tuck women in corporate leadership positions. Many of you will go into the corporate world, large or small, or into other organizations still dominated by male leadership. Here's what I'm asking you to think about and promote as and when you set out on the career path for which Tuck has prepared you. And I'm asking the women and the men. These 5 action points were developed by a symposium of 50 women of my vintage who gathered in Tuscany 5 years ago to use our experience to accelerate gender parity in corporate leadership. The movement is called Paradigm for Parity. And so far we have over 100 corporate CEOs who have pledged to a near-term goal of having 30% of women in senior roles. The 5 simple concepts are: first, make sure you and your organization understand, minimize, and strive to eliminate unconscious bias. Aim for gender parity in senior operating roles. Measure against targets and communicate results internally and externally. Endeavor to promote based on performance and not presence. And I think the last 3 months of working from home on an enforced basis have changed many attitudes on what working remotely means. And finally, make sure that senior women with potential have sponsors in your organization as well as mentors. So that's my commercial message, or perhaps I should say my public service announcement. If we do not accelerate progress towards gender parity, 50 years from now, one of you will be on the podium with the same lament. So in closing, may I congratulate each of you for achieving your Tuck MBA, and may I wish you good health, safe travels, good luck, and success in your chosen career. Thank you very much.